Long before the sun never set on the British Empire, the seeds of global dominion were sown not by kings alone, but by the strategic brilliance and iron will of its queens. For centuries, the crown was a heavy burden, passed through bloodlines and secured through marriage, yet it was the women who often navigated the treacherous waters of courtly intrigue and international diplomacy. This is not a tale of mere pageantry, but a chronicle of power, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of legacy that defined a nation's destiny on the world stage. From medieval foundations to the Victorian zenith, female leadership shaped the very soul of the empire. To understand the rise of the British Empire, one must look back to the foundational struggles of queens like Matilda and Eleanor of Aquitaine. These women defied the gender norms of their era, asserting their right to rule and managing vast territories that spanned the English Channel. Their influence established the precedent that a female sovereign could command armies and govern with an intellect that rivaled any king. Through their political manoeuvring, they laid the groundwork for a centralized authority that would eventually project its power across the farthest reaches of the globe, blending domestic governance with international ambition. The path to empire was often paved with religious upheaval and the desperate search for legitimacy. Mary I, the first queen regnant of England, faced a nation divided and a court suspicious of her every move. Her reign was a crucible of fire and faith, where she sought to restore a traditional order in a rapidly changing world. Though often remembered for the harshness of her convictions, her struggle to maintain the sovereignty of the English crown against internal and external pressures was a vital chapter in the evolution of royal power and the definition of the state. Her legacy remains a complex study of conviction and survival. With the ascension of Elizabeth I, the concept of a British identity began to crystallize into a global vision. Rejecting the traditional path of dynastic marriage, she declared herself wed to her nation, transforming her image into a symbol of divine stability. Elizabeth understood the power of iconography and propaganda, using her court as a stage to project strength to a world of ambitious rivals. Under her watch, the first tentative steps toward overseas exploration began, setting the stage for an era where the seas would become the primary conduit for British influence and wealth, marking the true dawn of the imperial age. The year 1588 marked a definitive turning point for the future empire. As the Spanish Armada loomed on the horizon, threatening to dismantle English sovereignty, Elizabeth stood at Tilbury, her words inspiring a navy that would defy the odds. The defeat of the Armada was more than just a military victory. It was a psychological breakthrough that signalled England's emergence as a formidable maritime power. This triumph allowed the Queen to patronise early chartered companies, such as the East India Company, which would eventually become the primary engine of imperial expansion across the Asian continent, forever changing the global map. The evolution of the British Empire required a shift from absolute rule to a more stable constitutional framework. This transition was anchored by Queen Mary II during the Glorious Revolution. By ruling jointly with William of Orange, Mary helped solidify the role of Parliament while maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. This unique balance of power provided the internal stability necessary for Britain to focus its energies outward. Her reign ensured that the crown would remain the symbolic heart of a growing global network, even as the mechanisms of governance began to modernize and expand toward a more complex imperial structure. Queen Anne's reign was a pivotal moment in the formalization of the British identity. With the Act of Union in 1707, the kingdoms of England and Scotland were joined into Great Britain, creating a unified domestic base from which to project imperial power. Anne, though often plagued by ill health, presided over a court that saw the rise of the first true British professional army and navy. This unification was not merely administrative, it was the birth of a unified national purpose that would drive the expansion of trade and territory across the Atlantic and beyond for the next 2 centuries. Under Anne, Britain's involvement in the War of the Spanish Succession secured vital territories like Gibraltar and Acadia, establishing key strategic outposts that would guard the empire's trade routes for centuries. The Queen's support for her generals and her steady hand in diplomacy ensured that Britain emerged from the conflict as the dominant European power on the seas. This period saw the empire begin to take a more tangible form, as the spoils of war were translated into commercial monopolies and a growing network of colonies that fueled the burgeoning British economy and solidified its maritime supremacy. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the foundations laid by earlier queens prepared the nation for its greatest era of expansion. The Industrial Revolution began to churn, transforming the economic landscape and providing the technological means to sustain a truly global empire. The shift from a mercantile system to an industrial powerhouse was overseen by a monarchy that had become the ultimate symbol of British continuity. The stage was being set for a young queen who would come to embody the very essence of the empire, inheriting a legacy of female leadership that spanned centuries of progress and conflict. When the young Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, she inherited a fractured but rapidly growing domain. She was a figure of duty and discipline, whose long reign would see the British Empire reach its zenith, covering nearly a quarter of the globe's landmass. Victoria became more than just a monarch. She was the grandmother of Europe and the Empress of India, a living icon of imperial reach. Her influence shaped the culture, morality, and political structure of a world transformed by British interests, marking the culmination of a centuries-long journey led by powerful queens who redefined the nature of power. In the early years of her reign, Victoria faced the immense task of asserting her authority within a male-dominated political sphere. Her marriage to Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1840 proved to be a turning point, transforming the monarchy into a partnership of shared intellectual and administrative labour. Albert became her closest advisor, helping her navigate the complexities of constitutional governance and industrial expansion. Together, they sought to project an image of royal respectability and family duty, a stark contrast to the perceived decadence of her predecessors. This partnership laid the foundational stability required for the empire's unprecedented growth. The Great Exhibition of 1851 marked a definitive moment in Victoria's reign, showcasing the technological and industrial might of the British Empire to the world. Orchestrated largely by Prince Albert, the event was housed in the magnificent Crystal Palace, an architectural marvel of glass and iron. It was a celebration of progress, bringing together artifacts from every corner of the globe under one roof. For Victoria, it was a personal triumph that signalled Britain's status as the workshop of the world. The exhibition reinforced the idea that the empire was not just a military force, but a beacon of civilization and industrial ingenuity. War, however, was never far from the edges of the imperial dream. The Crimean War in the mid-1850s brought the harsh realities of conflict into the public eye, revealing systemic failures in military logistics and medical care. Victoria took a deep personal interest in the welfare of her soldiers. Corresponding with Florence Nightingale, and instituting the Victoria Cross, the highest award for bravery. Her involvement humanised the monarchy during a time of national crisis, bridging the gap between the distant sovereign and the men fighting in the mud of the Crimea. It was a demonstration of the Queen as the mother of her people and their protector. As the mid-century progressed, the British Empire expanded its reach through a combination of trade, diplomacy, and direct conquest. The Royal Navy patrolled the seas, ensuring that British goods and influence flowed freely from the Caribbean to the South China Sea. Victoria's name was etched into the landscape of new colonies, from cities to massive waterfalls, making her a global presence even for those who would never see her face. This era of expansion was fueled by a belief in the inherent superiority of British institutions, an ideology that Victoria herself embodied through her unwavering sense of duty and moral rectitude in governance. The year 1857 brought a seismic shift in the administration of the empire with the Indian Rebellion. The uprising against the East India Company's rule led to a brutal conflict and the eventual dissolution of the company's power. In its wake, the British government took direct control of India, and Victoria was positioned as the ultimate authority over the subcontinent. She advocated for a policy of clemency and religious tolerance in the aftermath, hoping to reconcile the diverse populations of India to British rule. This transition from corporate exploitation to direct crown governance marked the beginning of the British Raj, with Victoria at its head. In 1876, at the urging of Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, Queen Victoria was officially proclaimed Empress of India. This title was more than just a formal honour. It was a powerful symbolic statement that placed her at the pinnacle of a global hierarchy. India became the jewel in the crown, the most vital and prestigious part of the British Empire. Victoria took her new role seriously, learning phrases in Hindustani and surrounding herself with Indian advisors like Abdul Karim. The title of Empress solidified the link between the British monarchy and its most populous colony, cementing a complex legacy of imperial paternalism and cultural exchange. The death of Prince Albert in 1861 plunged Victoria into a lifelong state of mourning, profoundly affecting the character of her reign. She retreated from public view, becoming the Widow of Windsor, a figure cloaked in black who communicated with her ministers through written dispatches. This period of isolation initially sparked Republican sentiment, but Victoria's steadfast adherence to her duties eventually won back the public's sympathy. Her mourning became a national symbol of devotion, and her black attire set a standard for Victorian social etiquette. Even in her grief, she remained the central anchor of the empire, her personal tragedy woven into the fabric of the state. Victoria's personal values and moral strictness came to define an entire era known as the Victorian Age. This period was characterized by a focus on family, discipline, and a rigid social hierarchy, which were exported across the empire. Her image as a devoted mother and a virtuous queen served as a unifying cultural force for the diverse territories under British control. Schools, laws, and social customs from Canada to Australia were modelled after the British example. While this moral framework provided a sense of order, it also imposed British sensibilities on indigenous cultures, creating a complex and often contentious legacy of cultural assimilation and resistance. The Golden and Diamond Jubilees of 1887 and 1897 were the ultimate celebrations of Victoria's long reign and the reach of the British Empire. These events saw leaders and soldiers from across the globe gather in London to pay homage to the Queen. The parades were a spectacle of imperial unity, showcasing the vast diversity of the lands over which she ruled. By this time, the phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," had become a reality. Victoria, now an elderly matriarch, was the living embodiment of this global power, representing a century of unprecedented change and the peak of British international dominance. When Queen Victoria died in January 1901, it marked the end of an era that had redefined the world. Her reign of over 63 years had seen Britain transform from an agrarian society into an industrial powerhouse and the world's largest empire. She left behind a legacy that was both magnificent and controversial, having overseen a period of immense growth, scientific discovery, and imperial expansion, but also of colonial conflict and social upheaval. As her funeral procession moved through the streets of London, the world watched the passing of a woman who had become the face of an age, leaving a global footprint that would endure for decades to come. As the Victorian era faded into history, a new century dawned with Queen Alexandra at the side of Edward VII. Though a consort, her influence was profound, particularly in her role as a diplomatic bridge between Britain and the royal houses of Europe. In an age of rising tensions and shifting alliances, Alexandra utilised her Danish heritage and social grace to soften the edges of British imperial assertiveness. She became a patron of nursing and social welfare, ensuring the monarchy remained visible and sympathetic to the common people during the early 20th century transition from Victorian rigidity to Edwardian expansion. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 brought a new and grimmer challenge to the British monarchy. Queen Mary, the wife of George V, became a pillar of strength during the nation's darkest hours. Unlike the distant queens of the past, Mary was frequently seen visiting munitions factories, hospitals, and troops, her presence a symbol of stability amidst global chaos. She understood that the survival of the empire depended on the survival of the British home front. Her tireless work during the Great War helped rebrand the royal family as the House of Windsor, distancing them from their German ancestral roots. In the interwar period, Queen Mary took on the role of the empire's cultural custodian. She painstakingly organised the royal collection, recognising that the history of the monarchy was a powerful tool for maintaining imperial identity in a changing world. As nationalist movements began to stir in India and beyond, Mary's focus on the continuity of the crown provided a sense of permanence. She was the matriarch of an empire that was beginning to question its own future, using the grandeur of the past to bolster the legitimacy of the present in a landscape of economic depression and political unrest. The 1936 abdication crisis threatened to dismantle the very foundations of the British Empire. When Edward VIII chose love over the throne, the weight of the monarchy fell upon his brother, George VI, and his wife, Elizabeth. The new Queen Elizabeth, later known as the Queen Mother, was instrumental in restoring the public's faith. She viewed the crown as a sacred duty, not a personal choice. Together, they worked to heal the rift caused by the abdication, preparing the nation and its territories for the inevitable conflict that loomed on the horizon as Nazi Germany rose in power. During World War II, Queen Elizabeth's refusal to leave London during the Blitz became a defining moment in the history of the empire. As bombs fell on the capital, she famously declared that she would not leave without the king, and the king would never leave. Her presence in the bombed-out ruins of Buckingham Palace provided a powerful image of shared suffering and defiance. Adolf Hitler reportedly called her the most dangerous woman in Europe because of her ability to galvanize British morale. Her role during the war solidified the monarchy's place in the heart of a global empire fighting for survival. In February 1952, the course of history changed in the remote forests of Kenya. While on a colonial tour, Princess Elizabeth received news of her father's sudden death. She had climbed up a tree as a princess and descended as a queen. At just 25 years old, Elizabeth II inherited an empire in transition, with the winds of decolonization blowing across Africa and Asia. Her accession marked the beginning of a new Elizabethan age, one that would require her to navigate the complex shift from a colonial ruler to a symbolic figurehead of a voluntary Commonwealth of Nations. The coronation of 1953 was a masterful blend of ancient tradition and modern media. For the first time, the world watched via television as the young Queen was crowned in Westminster Abbey. The event was not just a national celebration, but a global imperial statement, broadcast to every corner of the Commonwealth. Elizabeth II wore a gown embroidered with the floral emblems of the various Commonwealth nations, signalling her intent to be a queen for all her peoples. The ceremony reinforced the mystical and religious foundations of the monarchy, even as the world moved into a technological future. As the 1960s approached, the British Empire underwent a rapid transformation into the Commonwealth. Queen Elizabeth II embraced this shift, reinventing the role of the monarch. She became the most travelled head of state in history, visiting newly independent nations to maintain a personal connection that politics could no longer sustain. Her influence was subtle but pervasive, acting as a unifying figure for diverse nations with shared history. Through her constant presence on the world stage, she ensured that the legacy of the British Empire evolved into a modern network of diplomatic and cultural influence. Behind the scenes of Cold War diplomacy, the Queen's role was often one of a silent but powerful mediator. Her weekly audiences with prime ministers, from Churchill to Wilson, provided a rare continuity in British governance. In the Commonwealth, she often acted as a cooling influence during times of racial tension and political upheaval, particularly in Southern Africa. While she remained constitutionally neutral, her commitment to the multiracial ideal of the Commonwealth often put her at odds with her own government's policies, demonstrating a quiet authority that helped shape the geopolitical landscape of the mid-20th century. By the late 20th century, the British Empire as a territorial entity had largely vanished, yet the influence of its queens remained etched into the global fabric. From the expansionist fervour of Elizabeth I and Victoria to the stabilising presence of Elizabeth II, female monarchs had overseen the rise, peak, and transformation of the world's most powerful empire. They served as symbols of continuity through centuries of radical change, proving that the crown's power lay not just in land and gold, but in its ability to adapt and endure as a cultural and psychological anchor for a global community. The transition from the 16th century expansionism of Elizabeth I to the 19th century global hegemony of Victoria was not merely a passage of time, but an evolution of the feminine archetype in leadership. These queens utilised their gender not as a limitation, but as a strategic tool for diplomacy and national branding. Elizabeth I had forged an identity as the Virgin Queen, wedded to her nation, while Victoria presented herself as the grandmother of Europe. This psychological manoeuvring allowed the British monarchy to maintain a sense of moral authority, even as the empire's physical reach expanded across every ocean and continent. Elizabeth I's legacy was anchored in the wooden walls of the Royal Navy. Her decision to invest in privateers and naval technology set a precedent that would endure for 4 centuries. By the time Victoria took the throne, the Navy was the undisputed master of the seas, a force that protected trade routes and enforced British law globally. The foundations laid by the Tudor Queen allowed the Victorian era to flourish through maritime dominance, proving that the strategic vision of a single female monarch could dictate the military trajectory of an entire empire long after her death. While the men of the Victorian era managed the factories and the mines, the Queen herself became the primary patron of the Industrial Revolution's cultural impact. Victoria's reign saw the birth of the Great Exhibition, a showcase of global innovation that positioned Britain as the workshop of the world. This era of unprecedented progress was framed by the Queen's own domestic stability, providing a calm centre to the storm of rapid modernisation. Her influence ensured that industrialisation was not seen merely as a mechanical shift, but as a civilising mission that defined the British character for a new century. The role of the Queen also evolved into that of a master diplomat. Through a complex web of royal marriages, Victoria connected the British throne to nearly every major power in Europe. This royal diplomacy acted as a hidden layer of international relations, where family ties often dictated the movement of armies and the signing of treaties. This era of the grandmother of Europe showcased how female leadership could weave a fabric of peace through personal connection, even as the cold machinery of imperial politics continued to grind forward in the background of global affairs. As the 20th century dawned, the empire faced the inevitable pressures of decolonization. It was here that the role of the Queen transitioned from an absolute ruler to a symbolic figurehead of the Commonwealth. Elizabeth II took the mantle during a period of radical change, transforming the crown into a bridge between the imperial past and an independent future. Her ability to command respect in former colonies allowed for a smoother transition than many had predicted, demonstrating that the psychological power of the monarchy could survive the loss of territorial control through the sheer force of continuity. The soft power of the British Queens became their most enduring weapon in the modern era. Through state visits, charitable works, and the cultivation of a global image, the female monarchs maintained a level of influence that transcended political borders. This was a form of power that land and gold could not buy, a cultural prestige that made the British crown a recognisable symbol from the streets of London to the remote corners of the globe. This branding of the monarchy ensured that even as the empire faded, British culture remained a dominant force in the international community. Cultural iconography was perhaps the most subtle way these queens shaped the world. From the Shakespearean drama that flourished under Elizabeth I to the rigid social codes of the Victorian era, the personal tastes and moral compasses of the queens became the standards for the empire. Their influence dictated the arts, the literature, and even the architecture of their times. By setting the cultural tone of the capital, they exported a specific vision of Britishness that would be emulated, criticised, and eventually integrated into the identities of the nations that once formed the empire. In times of crisis, the queens served as the empire's psychological anchor. Whether it was Elizabeth I addressing her troops at Tilbury, or Elizabeth II broadcasting messages of hope during the Blitz, their voices provided a sense of stability when the world seemed to be falling apart. This ability to embody the national spirit during wartime and social upheaval was a key factor in the empire's endurance. The crown became a symbol of keeping calm and carrying on, a mantra that allowed the British people to weather the storms of history with a stoic, unified resolve. The modernisation of the empire was also fueled by the Queen's patronage of science and discovery. Victoria's interest in the latest inventions and Elizabeth II's embrace of the digital age showed a monarchy that was not stuck in the past, but one that paved the way for the future. By supporting explorers, scientists, and innovators, they ensured that the British Empire remained at the cutting edge of human knowledge. This commitment to progress helped transform the empire from a collection of territories into a global leader in technology and intellectual pursuits, leaving a legacy that outlasted the crown's political might. Ultimately, the role of queens in shaping the British Empire was defined by their ability to adapt and endure. They were the architects of an empire that was as much a psychological construct as it was a physical one. From the first expansionist breaths of the 16th century to the globalized Commonwealth of the 21st, female monarchs provided the continuity and vision required to navigate 5 centuries of change. Their mark is not just found in the history books, but in the very fabric of the modern world, where the echoes of their reigns continue to resonate across every continent. The late 17th century brought a seismic shift to the British throne. Mary II, daughter of James II, was forced to navigate the treacherous waters of the Glorious Revolution. Her ascent, alongside her husband William of Orange, redefined the crown's relationship with its subjects and the law. It was more than a change of ruler. It was the birth of a constitutional monarchy. This shift ensured that the empire's future expansion would be fueled by parliamentary stability rather than royal whim. Mary's quiet yet firm resolve provided the necessary legitimacy for a regime that would soon dominate global trade and secure the Protestant succession. Ruling as a co-monarch, Mary II proved that a queen could provide the domestic stability required for overseas ambitions. While William focused on European battlefields, Mary managed the internal affairs of a nation on the brink of global greatness. Her influence was subtle but profound, maintaining a sense of traditional continuity during a period of radical change. She fostered an environment where the Bank of England could be established, providing the financial engine for the coming imperial century. Her reign was a masterclass in soft power, securing the home front while the foundations of a global mercantile empire were being laid beneath the surface. Queen Anne's reign saw the formal birth of Great Britain. The 1707 Acts of Union merged the kingdoms of England and Scotland, creating a unified political powerhouse. Anne, though plagued by health issues, presided over a period of unprecedented territorial and commercial growth. Her support for the Duke of Marlborough's campaigns checked French ambitions in Europe, while the Treaty of Utrecht secured vital colonial outposts like Gibraltar and Acadia. Under Anne, the idea of a British identity began to crystallise, providing a cohesive cultural framework for the burgeoning empire to export across its growing territories and cementing the Crown's authority over the Atlantic trade. The expansion of the Royal Navy under Queen Anne transformed Britain into the world's leading maritime power. This era of Rule Britannia was not just about naval might, but about securing the trade routes that were the lifeblood of the empire. Anne's ministers and admirals operated with a newfound sense of national purpose, fueled by the Queen's steadfast patronage. The wealth of the Americas and the spices of the East began to flow into London's docks in ever greater volumes. The Queen's influence was the glue that held together a fractious political landscape, allowing the engine of global commerce to accelerate toward its peak in the coming century. As the Stuart line ended and the Hanoverians arrived, the blueprint for the modern empire was already in place. The queens of the previous century had established the precedent that the monarchy was the enduring heart of a changing state. This transition period saw the shift from personal royal rule to a system where the monarch acted as the ultimate arbiter and symbol of national unity. This evolution was crucial for an empire that was becoming too vast for any single individual to manage. The vision of a unified Protestant and commercially driven Britain remained the guiding light, setting the stage for the arrival of the next great female monarch. In 1837, a young Victoria ascended the throne, inheriting an empire that was vast but lacked a cohesive moral centre. Her coronation marked the beginning of an era where the Queen would become the very personification of the British state. Victoria's long reign provided the stability necessary for the Industrial Revolution to reshape the world. She transformed the monarchy into a symbol of domestic virtue and imperial duty, bridging the gap between the old aristocratic world and the new industrial reality. Her presence was the constant thread through decades of rapid technological and social change, anchoring the empire's identity as it reached its zenith. Victoria's marriage to Prince Albert was more than a romantic union. It was a strategic partnership that modernised the British Empire. Albert brought a focus on science, industry, and education, which Victoria championed with unwavering devotion. Together, they redefined the role of the royal family as patrons of progress. This period saw the empire become the workshop of the world, with British innovations in steam and steel reaching every corner of the globe. The partnership ensured that the monarchy remained relevant in an age of science, positioning the Queen as the figurehead of a forward-looking, globalised superpower that dominated the 19th century world. The Great Exhibition of 1851 was the pinnacle of Victorian confidence. Under the Queen's patronage, the world's first international expo showcased the staggering reach of the British Empire. From Indian silks to Canadian timber, the wealth of the globe was gathered under one glass roof. This event wasn't just a display of goods, it was a psychological assertion of British supremacy. Victoria viewed the exhibition as a way to promote peace through trade, cementing her role as the global matriarch of an interconnected world. The empire was no longer just a collection of colonies, but a unified, high-tech economic system under a singular crown. In 1876, Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India, a title that symbolised the peak of the British Empire's expansion. This shift turned the Queen into a global icon of authority, a mother figure to hundreds of millions across diverse cultures and continents. The title solidified the Raj and tied the fate of the Indian subcontinent directly to the British crown. While the reality of imperial rule was complex and often harsh, the image of the Empress provided a singular point of loyalty that held the sprawling, disparate territories together. Victoria's name became synonymous with an era of undisputed British global dominance and the weight of imperial governance. Following the death of Albert, Victoria retreated into a period of deep mourning, becoming the widow of Windsor. Yet, her absence from public life only increased her symbolic power. She became an almost mythic figure, a constant presence that spanned generations. Her stoicism and endurance became the defining traits of the late Victorian Empire. By the end of her reign, she had overseen the transition from a collection of coastal outposts to a global empire upon which the sun never set. Her legacy was a blueprint for how a queen could shape the world through continuity, symbol, and an unwavering sense of imperial destiny. As the bells of St. George's Chapel tolled for Victoria in 1901, the Victorian era dissolved into the mist of history, making way for a new century. The transition was not merely a change of monarch, but a shift in the very soul of the empire. The heavy gilded mourning of the previous decades gave way to the Edwardian twilight, where the role of the Queen Consort would begin to evolve. Queen Alexandra, though often overshadowed by her husband Edward VII, maintained the dignity of the crown during a time of rapid technological and social change. Her presence ensured that the monarchy remained a stable anchor in a world tilting toward modernity. Queen Alexandra brought a different kind of influence to the throne, one rooted in diplomacy and quiet, soft power. Born a Danish princess, her deep-seated suspicion of Prussian expansionism subtly influenced British foreign policy, steering the empire toward closer ties with France and Russia. This shift, though unofficial, helped lay the groundwork for the Triple Entente. Alexandra's public image was one of impeccable grace and charity, masking a shrewd understanding of international tensions. She redefined the Queen Consort not as a mere figurehead, but as a silent architect of the alliances that would soon define the geopolitical landscape of the early 20th century. As the empire reached its zenith, the domestic role of the Queen began to encompass the burgeoning needs of the people. Alexandra championed the nursing profession and the welfare of the poor, creating a direct link between the palace and the disenfranchised. This was the birth of the People's Queen archetype, where the monarch's consort acted as the moral conscience of the nation. Through her work with the Red Cross and her patronage of hospitals, she demonstrated that the empire's strength was not just in its navy or its trade, but in the health and loyalty of its subjects, cementing the crown's relevance in a democratic age. With the accession of George V, Queen Mary stepped into the light as a pillar of tradition and iron-willed stability. Mary was a collector, not just of jewels and art, but of history itself. She understood that for the empire to survive the rising tides of republicanism and social unrest, the monarchy had to be seen as an eternal, unchanging force. Her meticulously curated public image and her devotion to the protocols of the court provided a sense of continuity that calmed a nervous nation. To Mary, the empire was a sacred trust, and she was its most vigilant guardian, ensuring that the old ways survived the new century. The outbreak of the Great War in 1914 tested the very foundations of the British Empire. As millions of men headed to the front, Queen Mary became the symbol of national endurance. She was not content to remain behind palace walls. She organised supply drives, visited munitions factories, and comforted the grieving. This was a war of total mobilisation, and Mary's presence on the home front bridged the gap between the royal family and the working classes. Her stoic refusal to show weakness, even as her own family faced danger, mirrored the resilience required of the empire during its darkest hour of the 20th century. In the aftermath of the war, the empire began to fracture. Decolonization movements stirred in India and across Africa, and the old imperial order felt increasingly brittle. Queen Mary and the royal family had to adapt, utilising new technologies like the radio to reach the far-flung corners of the globe. The Christmas broadcast became a way for the Queen and King to enter the homes of their subjects, turning the abstract idea of the empire into a personal connection. Despite the shifting borders, Mary maintained a sense of imperial unity, portraying the monarchy as the central thread that held the Commonwealth together through sheer force of will. As the clouds of the Second World War gathered, a new Queen Elizabeth, the consort of George VI, rose to prominence. When the Blitz began, she famously refused to leave London, stating that she would not leave the king, and the king would never leave the country. Her resilience became a rallying cry for the empire. By remaining in the capital under fire, she dismantled the barriers of class that had once separated the crown from the commoners. She was no longer just a queen, she was a partner in the struggle, a figure of maternal strength who transformed the monarchy into a symbol of shared suffering and survival. When Buckingham Palace itself was hit by German bombs, The Queen Mother remarked, "I'm glad we've been bombed. It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." This moment was a turning point for the imperial image. The Queen's proximity to danger validated the struggle of every citizen across the empire. Her presence in the bombed-out streets of London, often accompanied by the King, provided a visual testament to the Crown's commitment to its people. This shared trauma forged a new kind of loyalty, one that would sustain the monarchy as the empire transitioned into a post-war world of uncertainty and change. In the final years of the 1940s, the empire was rapidly evolving into the Commonwealth. The Queen Mother played a crucial role during the royal tour of South Africa in 1947, where she and the King sought to maintain the bonds of the former colonies. Accompanying them was their young daughter, Elizabeth, who would soon inherit a very different world. The tour was a swan song for the old empire, a final display of imperial pageantry before the tide of independence became a flood. It was here that the groundwork for the modern Commonwealth was laid, through a delicate balance of tradition and the acknowledgement of a changing global order. The death of George VI in 1952 marked the end of an era and the beginning of the new Elizabethan age. Princess Elizabeth, while on a tour in Kenya, learned she had become queen. She descended from the plane in London, dressed in mourning black, a young woman carrying the weight of an empire in retreat and a commonwealth in its infancy. Her accession represented a bridge between the imperial past of her grandmother, Mary, and the modern future. The crown she inherited was no longer just a symbol of dominion, but one of unity, service, and a promise to adapt to a world that was rapidly leaving the old ways behind. In 1953, the coronation of Elizabeth II served as a powerful synthesis of ancient tradition and modern innovation. For the first time, cameras were allowed inside Westminster Abbey, bringing the sacred mysteries of the monarchy into millions of living rooms. As the St. Edward's crown was lowered onto her head, the weight was not just physical, but symbolic of an empire being transformed into a commonwealth. The Queen, solemn and resolute, understood that her reign would be defined by visibility and service, rather than the distant authority of her predecessors, signalling a new contract between the crown and its global subjects. The 1950s and 60s witnessed the accelerating tide of decolonization, as nations across Africa and Asia sought their independence. Elizabeth II navigated this seismic shift with a policy of graceful retreat and diplomatic continuity. Rather than resisting the inevitable end of colonial rule, she positioned herself as the head of a voluntary association of equal states. This transition was fraught with tension, as the old imperial guard struggled to reconcile with a world that no longer accepted British dominance. The Queen's role became that of a stabilizer, ensuring that as the Union Jack was lowered, a new spirit of cooperation could emerge. Elizabeth embarked on exhaustive Commonwealth tours, travelling thousands of miles to connect with her diverse subjects. These journeys were more than mere ceremonies. They were strategic efforts to redefine the monarchy's relevance in a post-imperial world. In cities like Lagos, Delhi, and Canberra, she was met with a mixture of reverence and the burgeoning energy of new nationalism. By appearing in person, she humanized the institution of the crown, transforming it from a symbol of distant oppression into one of shared history. These tours cemented her position as the world's most travelled monarch, bridging the gap between the old world and the new. As the Cold War froze global politics into opposing blocs, the Queen maintained a subtle but vital influence on British foreign policy. Meeting weekly with her prime ministers, starting with the ageing Winston Churchill, she provided a sense of historical continuity that transcended party politics. While she held no legislative power, her deep knowledge of Commonwealth affairs and her personal relationships with world leaders made her an invaluable diplomatic asset. In the shadows of the cabinet room, the young queen evolved into a seasoned stateswoman, her soft power serving as a quiet anchor for a nation navigating the perilous waters of the nuclear age. The 1960s brought a cultural revolution that threatened to make the monarchy appear like a relic of a bygone era. From the rise of pop culture to the questioning of traditional hierarchies, the British social fabric was changing. Elizabeth II and the palace had to find a way to modernise without losing the mystique that sustained the crown. This era saw the introduction of a more informal monarchy, though the Queen herself remained a figure of stoic tradition. This tension between the radical changes in society and the unchanging nature of the sovereign created a unique paradox that defined the middle years of her reign. The Silver Jubilee of 1977 was a turning point, occurring during a period of deep economic hardship and civil unrest in Britain. Many predicted the celebrations would be a failure, yet the public response was an overwhelming display of affection. Street parties erupted across the country, showing that the bond between the people and the Queen remained resilient despite the decline of the empire's former glory. For Elizabeth, it was a confirmation that the monarchy still served as a unifying force, a source of national identity and pride that could survive the loss of global dominance and the bitterness of industrial decline. The arrival of Margaret Thatcher as the first female Prime Minister in 1979 created a fascinating dynamic at the heart of British power. While the Queen was the head of the Commonwealth, Thatcher was a staunch nationalist, leading to frequent, though private, clashes over policy, particularly regarding sanctions against apartheid-era South Africa. This period highlighted the Queen's role as a moral compass for the Commonwealth, often prioritising the unity of the multiracial association over the political leanings of her own government. The two most powerful women in the world navigated a complex relationship that tested the boundaries of the constitutional monarchy. The 1997 handover of Hong Kong marked the final symbolic end of the British Empire. As the royal yacht Britannia sailed out of Victoria Harbour for the last time, the Queen's representative, Prince Charles, looked on as the colonial era officially closed. For Elizabeth II, it was the conclusion of a process she had overseen for nearly half a century. The transition from an imperial power to a medium-sized European state was complete. The Queen remained, but the world she now inhabited was one where the influence of the British crown was purely symbolic, yet perhaps more culturally pervasive than ever before. The 1990s were a decade of deep personal and institutional crisis for the monarchy, famously dubbed the Annus Horribilis by the Queen in 1992. The fire at Windsor Castle and the public breakdown of her children's marriages brought the crown under unprecedented scrutiny. The mystery and distance that had protected the monarchy for centuries were stripped away by a relentless media. Elizabeth II was forced to adapt, agreeing to pay income tax and opening the palace to the public. This period of vulnerability showed a more human side of the sovereign, proving that even an ancient institution had to evolve to survive the modern age. As the 21st century dawned, Elizabeth II stood as a global icon of stability in an era of rapid change. She had outlasted dozens of world leaders and seen the world transformed by technology and globalization. Her role had evolved from the ruler of an empire to the grandmother of a commonwealth, a constant presence in a world that felt increasingly fragmented. Her longevity was her greatest strength, providing a living link to the history of the 20th century. As the Queen looked toward her golden jubilee, the monarchy had found a new, stable equilibrium rooted in service and a quiet, enduring sense of duty. The year 2002 marked the Golden Jubilee, a milestone reached amidst a period of profound, personal loss for the Queen. Within months, both her sister, Princess Margaret, and the Queen Mother passed away, leaving Elizabeth II as the primary custodian of the family's legacy. Despite her grief, she embarked on an arduous tour of the Commonwealth, reaffirming her commitment to the nations that had once formed the backbone of the British Empire. The celebrations demonstrated that the monarchy remained a unifying force, a symbol of continuity that transcended the political turbulence of the early 21st century and the shifting social fabric of modern Britain. As the head of the Commonwealth, the Queen navigated the complex landscape of post-colonial relations with a quiet but firm hand. She recognised that the era of imperial dominance had long since passed, replaced by a voluntary association of independent nations. Her role was one of soft power, using her immense prestige to encourage dialogue and cooperation among leaders from vastly different backgrounds. Through her regular attendance at Commonwealth heads of government meetings, she fostered a sense of shared history and values, ensuring that the legacy of the empire evolved into a modern partnership based on mutual respect and shared global goals. The dawn of the digital age presented a new challenge for an institution rooted in ancient tradition. Elizabeth II, ever pragmatic, embraced the tools of the modern world to maintain the monarchy's relevance. From her first televised Christmas broadcast decades earlier to the launch of the royal website and social media presence, she bridged the gap between the medieval origins of her office and the hyper-connected reality of the 21st century. This adaptation was not merely cosmetic, it was a strategic move to ensure the crown remained visible and accessible to a generation that viewed the world through screens rather than through the lens of traditional deference. In 2012, the Diamond Jubilee celebrated 60 years of Elizabeth's reign, a feat previously achieved only by Queen Victoria. The centrepiece was a spectacular pageant on the River Thames, where 1,000 boats braved the rain and cold to honour her longevity. This event mirrored the maritime pageantry of the Elizabethan and Victorian eras, connecting the modern Queen to the seafaring traditions that had built the empire. Despite the inclement weather, the Queen stood on her barge for hours, a testament to her legendary endurance and her unwavering sense of public service, further solidifying her status as a beloved national symbol of resilience. The question of succession became more prominent as the Queen entered her 9th decade. She meticulously prepared her heirs, Prince Charles and Prince William, for the burdens of the crown, ensuring the continuity of the institution. This period saw a subtle shift in the royal family's public image, focusing on the 3 generations of future kings. Yet, the Queen remained the indisputable centre of gravity. Her influence was seen in the way she modelled the duties of a constitutional monarch for her successors, teaching them that the survival of the monarchy depended on its ability to serve the people while remaining above the fray of partisan politics. Beyond the borders of her own realm, the Queen's soft power was a critical asset for British interests. She met with 10 American presidents and countless other heads of state, acting as a seasoned diplomat who provided a sense of historical context that no elected politician could match. Her meetings were often private and confidential, yet her influence was felt in the strengthening of the special relationship and the stabilization of international alliances. She was a living archive of 20th century diplomacy, a woman who had known Churchill, Nehru, and Mandela, using her unique position to weave the threads of the former empire into a global network of influence. By the time of her Platinum Jubilee in 2022, Elizabeth II had become the longest reigning monarch in British history. The celebrations were tinged with a sense of an ending, as the nation and the world reflected on 7 decades of unprecedented service. Her appearance on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, though brief, was a powerful moment of connection with the public. She had become more than just a ruler. She was the personification of British identity. The Jubilee served as a final grand tribute to a woman who had seen the empire dissolve, the Commonwealth rise, and the world enter a new, uncertain millennium, all while remaining steadfast at her post. In her final months, the Queen retreated to Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, a place she had always loved for its solitude and connection to nature. Even as her health declined, her sense of duty remained absolute. She performed her final constitutional act, appointing her 15th Prime Minister, just days before her passing. The rugged landscape of the Highlands, with its mist-covered moors and ancient stones, provided a fitting backdrop for the end of a reign that had spanned an era. It was here, far from the ceremony of London, that the great Queen prepared for her final transition, having fulfilled the vow of service she made as a young girl. The passing of Queen Elizabeth II on September 8, 2022, marked the definitive end of the Elizabethan era and a seismic shift in the British psyche. For the majority of the world's population, she was the only British monarch they had ever known. As the crown passed to her son, King Charles III, the world paused to mourn a figure who had been a constant in an inconstant world. Her funeral was a masterpiece of tradition and solemnity, a final display of the pageantry she had overseen for 70 years. The symbolic lowering of the sovereign's flag signalled the conclusion of a life dedicated entirely to the service of her people and the preservation of the crown's dignity. Looking back across the centuries, the role of queens in shaping the British Empire is undeniable. From the expansionist ambitions of Elizabeth I and the constitutional foundations of Queen Anne, to the imperial zenith under Victoria and the diplomatic evolution under Elizabeth II, these women have been the architects of British identity. They navigated the transition from absolute power to ceremonial influence, ensuring the monarchy's survival through revolution, war, and social upheaval. Their legacies are woven into the very fabric of the modern world, proving that the crown, when worn by women of extraordinary character, could be a vessel for transformation, stability, and enduring national pride. The crown was never merely a piece of jewellery. It was a weight of history and expectation. For Elizabeth I, it was a shield against her enemies. For Victoria, it was a symbol of global dominance. Each queen redefined what it meant to lead a nation that was constantly in flux. They were not just figureheads, they were the central pillars in a structure that spanned continents. As we analyse their reigns, we see a pattern of strategic adaptation, where the monarch's personal strength compensated for the shifting powers of Parliament and the people. Their presence provided a continuity that prevented the nation from fragmenting during its most volatile periods of growth. Diplomacy under the queens often took on a nuanced, sophisticated character. While kings might have looked toward the battlefield, the queens of Britain frequently mastered the art of the long game. Anne's reign saw the union of parliaments, a masterstroke of internal diplomacy that secured the borders of the realm. Later, Elizabeth II navigated the delicate dissolution of the empire, transforming colonial subjects into equal partners within the Commonwealth. This ability to foster relationships through soft power and symbolic gestures ensured that British influence remained potent even as its military dominance receded. They were the ultimate negotiators of the nation's place on the world stage. Beyond politics, these women shaped the moral and social landscape of their eras. Queen Victoria's mourning of Prince Albert set a standard for Victorian stoicism and familial duty that resonated through every household in the empire. Her influence on the values of the middle class created a social cohesion that fueled the Industrial Revolution. Similarly, the modernising efforts of Elizabeth II reflected a changing Britain, one that was becoming more inclusive and global. By setting the tone of national character from the throne, these queens acted as the conscience of the empire, guiding its people through the moral complexities of expansion and eventual decolonization. The physical architecture of Britain and its former territories stands as a testament to the reigns of these powerful women. From the majestic palaces of London to the grand administrative buildings in New Delhi, the aesthetic of the empire was often a reflection of the reigning queen's image. Victoria's name is etched into more landmarks across the globe than perhaps any other individual in history. These structures were designed to project stability, grandeur, and an eternal British presence. Even now, the silhouettes of these buildings against the London skyline remind us of the immense scale of the vision these queens helped to cultivate and maintain over centuries. In times of crisis, the Queen's role transitioned from symbolic to spiritual leadership. During the dark days of the Spanish Armada, Elizabeth I's speech at Tilbury galvanized a nation on the brink of invasion. Centuries later, during the Blitz, the royal family's refusal to leave London became a beacon of hope for a besieged population. These moments of crisis defined the relationship between the monarch and the people, forging a bond that went deeper than law or politics. The queens became the embodiment of national resilience, standing firm when the world around them seemed to be falling apart, proving that the crown was an anchor in the storm. Patronage of the arts and sciences was a hallmark of the female British monarchs, fostering an environment where innovation could thrive. Elizabeth I oversaw the English Renaissance, providing the stability for Shakespeare and Marlowe to redefine literature. Queen Mary II and Queen Anne supported the development of scientific institutions and the beautification of the royal courts, which in turn inspired a flourishing of British intellectual life. This cultural legacy ensured that the British Empire was not just a military or economic force, but a global leader in thought and creativity. Their support for the thinkers of their age helped build the modern world's intellectual foundations. The transition from the British Empire to the Commonwealth of Nations was perhaps the most significant diplomatic feat of the 20th century. Elizabeth II played a pivotal role in this evolution, acting as the glue that held diverse nations together as they sought independence. Her commitment to the Commonwealth helped maintain British influence through a shared history rather than through force. This shift marked the end of the traditional imperial model and the birth of a new, collaborative, international community. It was a transformation guided by a queen who understood that for the monarchy to survive, it had to champion the self-determination of the peoples it once ruled. The life of a queen was often one of profound personal sacrifice. Behind the scenes of public duty lay a world of isolation and the heavy burden of constant scrutiny. Whether it was Elizabeth I choosing to remain the Virgin Queen for the sake of her kingdom's independence, or Victoria's decades of solitary mourning, the crown demanded everything. These women often had to submerge their personal desires beneath the needs of the state, living lives that were as much a prison as they were a pinnacle of power. This internal struggle, hidden from the public eye, added a layer of human tragedy to their historical triumphs. The historical record of these queens is etched into millions of documents, letters, and decrees stored in the archives of the realm. Each signature on a parchment represented a decision that could change the fate of millions. As historians sift through these records, they find the voices of women who were acutely aware of their place in history. They carefully curated their images and their legacies, knowing that they would be judged by future generations. This parchment history reveals a meticulous attention to detail and a profound sense of duty, showing that the shaping of the empire was a deliberate and calculated effort, spanning centuries of female rule. Today, the legacy of the British queens remains a cornerstone of the nation's identity. Their influence is visible not only in the structures of government and the borders of the Commonwealth, but in the very idea of what a sovereign should be. They proved that leadership is not defined by gender, but by the ability to adapt to the currents of history while remaining a symbol of stability. As the monarchy continues to evolve, it carries the imprint of the women who steered it through the most transformative eras in human history. Their stories are a testament to the enduring power of the crown and the extraordinary women who wore it. As we gaze back through the centuries, the silhouettes of England's most powerful women emerge from the fog of history. From the iron-willed Elizabeth I to the steadfast Elizabeth II, these sovereigns did not merely occupy the throne, they redefined it. Each era brought new challenges, revolutions, world wars, and the slow dissolution of an empire. Yet, the queens remained the constant thread in the tapestry of British identity. They managed the delicate balance between tradition and progress, ensuring that while the world changed around them, the crown remained a beacon of continuity for a nation in flux. The physical manifestations of their power, the sceptres, the globes, and the crowns, are more than just jewellery. They are vessels of a shared historical memory. When a queen wore the imperial state crown, she carried the weight of millions of lives and centuries of law. These artifacts, stored within the cold stone of the tower, whisper stories of midnight councils and desperate wartime broadcasts. They represent a lineage of female authority that survived in a world dominated by men, proving that the soft power of diplomacy and the hard power of the state could coexist within a single, determined individual. The transition from an empire of conquest to a commonwealth of nations was perhaps the most significant transformation overseen by the British monarchy. It was a queen who navigated this retreat with grace, turning a symbol of colonial rule into a symbol of voluntary cooperation. This shift required a masterful understanding of global politics and human psychology. By travelling to the farthest reaches of the globe, the queens humanized the monarchy, fostering personal connections that transcended borders and political ideologies, solidifying their roles as the ultimate diplomats of the modern age. Behind every public appearance was a lifetime of preparation. The education of a queen was a rigorous process, designed to strip away the personal in favour of the institutional. From childhood, they were taught that their primary duty was to the state, a lesson that required immense self-discipline and sacrifice. This grooming ensured that when they finally ascended the throne, they were not just individuals, but living embodiments of the law and the Constitution. This process of creating a monarch is a secretive, ancient tradition, one that has preserved the crown's relevance across the centuries. The written records left behind, letters, diaries, and official decrees, reveal the human hearts beating beneath the heavy robes of state. These documents are the primary sources of our understanding, showing queens who were at once vulnerable and indomitable. They agonized over the deaths of soldiers, the marriage of their children, and the fate of the poor. Through their correspondence, we see the evolution of the British language and the changing social mores of the empire. These archives are the silent witnesses to the inner lives of the women who shaped the modern world from their desks. The architectural landscape of Britain and its former colonies is an enduring testament to the influence of its queens. From the grand renovations of Windsor Castle to the monumental presence of the Victoria Memorial, these structures were designed to project power and stability. They were stages for the grand theatre of monarchy, built to awe the public and intimidate foreign rivals. Even today, these stone giants stand as reminders of the eras they represent, their walls saturated with the history of the women who commissioned them and the thousands who served within their shadows. The shift from absolute rule to a constitutional monarchy was a slow, often painful process, but it was the queens who most successfully navigated this change. They learned to lead through influence rather than decree, perfecting the art of the constitutional nudge. By staying above the fray of partisan politics, they provided a sense of national unity that no elected official could replicate. This transition ensured the survival of the crown in a democratic age, turning the monarch into a symbol of the nation's enduring spirit rather than a wielder of arbitrary power. Each queen's reign was a chapter in a much larger story, a story of a small island nation that became a global powerhouse and then a leader of a diverse commonwealth. This journey was marked by the distinct personalities of the women at the helm: Mary's religious fervour, Anne's quiet determination, Victoria's moral certitude, and Elizabeth II's tireless service. Together, they represent a unique phenomenon in world history, a lineage of female leadership that was not an exception, but a defining feature of one of the world's most influential and enduring civilizations. As we conclude this exploration, we see that the greatness of the British queens was not measured in the territory they held, but in the character they projected. They were the anchors of the state during periods of radical change, providing a sense of permanence in an impermanent world. Their stories are not just tales of crowns and palaces, but of women who faced extraordinary pressures with remarkable resilience. They proved that the crown is not just a burden, but a tool for progress, and that the women who wore it were the true architects of the modern British identity. The legacy of these women is a living history, continuing to shape the world long after their reigns have ended. As the sun sets on one era and rises on the next, the imprint of the queens remains etched into the fabric of the nation. Their lives serve as a masterclass in leadership, resilience, and the enduring power of duty. The story of the British Empire is, at its heart, the story of the women who held it together, reminding us that while crowns may be passed from one generation to the next, the spirit of the queens who wore them is eternal.